Here is my story. By way of a little history, in early 2000, my wife started showing signs of hand tremors. We visited a doctor who insisted it was essential tremor and not Parkinson's. Essential tremor is a medical term, and not Parkinson's, which I assumed it was. We came back to see him several times, and each time he insisted it was just essential tremor. In 3 years, he prescribed meds. The most telling incident occurred when we went to New York from our home in Florida for a family party. Virtually everyone in the family noticed that my wife was moving very slowly, as if in a trance. My daughters insisted that we stay in New York and visit the top Parkinson's doctor on Long Island. The doctor diagnosed her with Parkinson's disease in less than 1 minute and confirmed it with a PET scan. We were both very upset, but the New York doctor assured us that she would be okay for a number of years. On arriving back in Florida, I contacted the doctor who had been seeing her for 3 years. Totally furious, I asked how he could not have seen the obvious, Parkinson's disease, why he didn't order a PET scan, and why he drugged her into a stupor. He shrugged his shoulders and said it was his medical opinion on what it was and how to treat it. That was the last time I spoke to him. Following my wife's earlier diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, we both talked about the future. We spoke about how the future might look. My wife repeatedly made me promise that I would not let her suffer. She neither wanted to wind up in a nursing home, staring at a wall, or living trapped in a world of fear and of loneliness. I gave her my solemn word that I would never let that happen. Further, I told her that if it was I would want the same. She was my other half. She completed me and was my best friend, and I intended to keep the promises we made to never let that happen. As time went by, as is the case with all chronic neurologic illnesses, she slipped further away mentally and physically. She reminded me time and time again to not let her suffer and be in a world where she knew no one, and again, I promised her without a moment of hesitation to follow that promise. Sadly, I will forever live with the knowledge that I couldn't keep the promise I made to her. This is something that will haunt me forever. That's an important line that Barry has shared. Lines like that haunt me as well, and I suspect many, many others. Over the next years, we traveled to New York 4 times a year to see the Parkinson's specialist. There was little change in her condition, but in year 7, the New York doctor said it was time to get our own full-time doctor in Florida. I researched and got the very best Parkinson's specialist at the University of Miami-Jackson Memorial Hospital. The Miami doctor suggested that she was slowing down and it was time for medication. He also arranged for a cognitive test. The results of the cognitive test showed a small change from normal. In 2009, he added the medication Aricept to her regimen, and within a month, she fainted in a restaurant, and it lasted less than a minute, and 1 week later, it happened again. She was hospitalized to determine what was the cause. Overnight, she was taken off all the meds. The next morning, I was with her when a young girl entered the room to say that she was being scheduled for a pacemaker. I thought she was in the wrong room. I quickly called the doctor, who said she had stopped breathing for a few seconds twice during the night, and it was black and white. It had to be done. She was taken to OR immediately, and the pacemaker was implanted. This also made no sense to me. I thought it was the Aricept. The doctor told me that he had 700 patients on Aricept, and not one had shown fainting as a symptom. I called the manufacturer, and they too said that there was never a symptom. 3 months later, however, on a visit to her internist, he said that he had 4 patients with fainting as a reaction to Aricept. On our first visit to check on the efficiency of the pacemaker, we were told it was being used only 11% of the time. Our question why it was used so infrequently. My question was met with no response. Regarding the Aricept reaction expressed by our internist, he dismissed it as nothing he had ever heard of. By 2010, we saw major changes in her condition. She was slower and her cognitive ability was slipping. We revisited our attorney to ensure that our advance directives were the latest and the best and up to date. We both had the same directives. I knew we were in trouble when my wife, who had been playing cards and mahjong 5 days a week for 20 years plus, suddenly started making mistakes. The women who had been her friends for all these years were brutal to her and repeatedly chastised her for her mistakes. She often came home crying at the way that she was treated. I told her it was time to stop playing and we could spend our time together. She agreed. But as soon as that happened, virtually every friend for some 20 plus years disappeared from our lives. We were isolated, no friends, no social life. Our very best friends with whom we had traveled and were 7 days a week backed away from us. The wife of this couple, who was my wife's very best friend, could not bear to lose her place in the mahjong game and deserted us. It was a very sad time. Cognitive tests showed that she was quickly drifting into dementia. It was clear that she was failing badly, and I decided to hold a 50th anniversary party for 5 couples at our country club. Our 2 daughters flew in from New York as a surprise. It was a very bittersweet night. 3 nights later, my wife crossed over, that's in quotation marks, to the incompetent side of life. Shortly thereafter, she stood by me on my side of the bed at 3 a.m. I put the lights on, and she was fully dressed. I was startled and asked what she was doing. She said, "I have to go to school." I told her it was too early and that she should go back to bed. When we awoke at 8 a.m., I called her doctor. At the doctor's office, she was extremely disoriented and seemed to be out of it. She didn't even realize we were at the doctor's office. I was frightened beyond anything I had ever experienced. I did not know what to do. It was then that I was introduced to David Levy. He was the guru of non-clinical family caregiving. This man saved my life, as he had every bit of information that you would need when you just don't know what to do. He calmed me down and asked me the right questions, giving me the homework to do immediately. I had forgotten, but I had a long-term health care policy. I had paid for it for more than 20 years. David directed me to the attorney I had used for 20 years before. I contacted him and found the company I had the policy with. I called them and said, "I have a long-term care policy with you for both my wife and myself, but I know nothing about it. Need to check it out." Within moments, they found it and said it was the best policy they ever offered and that they don't even sell it anymore. And you will hear the reason why. They told me I would get $15,000 a month. I thought that was a fortune. And indeed, if you know those policies, that's a fortune. David directed me to start by having someone at home to help for 8 hours a day. He told me who to call, and I hired a company to provide the helper. After only 1 week, it became clear that 8 hours was not enough. I had to get 24/7 help, and that cost $15,000 a month. I was falling apart as my wife had to be moved out of our bedroom into a guest room. David helped me get all of the necessary equipment for that room, a hospital bed and aides for the nurses. It was a very sad day. My wife for 50 years was essentially gone from my life. She was breathing, but no longer knew who I was and no longer recognized our children. It was more than awful. David had me call in a palliative care hospice to monitor things in the home. It was at this time that I presented them with the advance directive and said, "Let her go." That was her written wish and strong desire. In my mind, she was now gone, except for breathing. In my mind, hospice and my doctors turned against me. I was incredulous. I have to say, parenthetically, that Barry's experience at this point in his story is not the same as my experience. I found hospice to be totally cooperative at that point, just a caveat. This was her wish, and now I wanted them to just let her go. They refused, saying from a medical perspective, she was not at end of life. I was nearly insane with grief and total despair. Believe it or not, several doctors told me if I wanted a quick demise, to place her in a very specific dementia facility because, quote, "this facility will kill her within days because it is ridden with contagious and fatal diseases." I put her in there.
Okay.
I've had trouble figuring this out, but it was a disgusting place. 50 patients were in chairs in front of a TV, and not one sound was heard. All were dead, except for breathing. Several were on the floor. I watched in horror as not one nurse moved to put patients back in their chairs. I screamed at them, but no one answered. I observed 3 nurses feeding patients by shoving spoons in their mouths. It was equally disgusting, as the nurses spoke to each other with little regard to their patients. Within 1 week, I took her out and threatened the facility with a lawsuit. I would not pay 1 penny to them. They quickly settled to get rid of me. David, that is David Levy, suggested taking her home and returning now to hospice to take her, although she was far from ready. They accepted her back, and out of gratitude and relief, I made a substantial donation in her name. While many patients in hospice passed quickly, my wife wasn't ready, and every day for more than 16 weeks, I begged them to let her go. No matter what I did, they would not let her go. By now, she was frozen in one position, eyes open but without a gaze. In my mind, she was dead, but for breathing. In the last month, they brought a spoon to her mouth 3 times a day. Why, I asked. It was the law, they said. I then asked, how many calories is she getting? They replied, less than 100. I asked, can a person survive with that? Well, no, they replied. I was furious. Will this torture never end? Not only wasn't it fair, but it flew in the face of our documents, which stated her expressed wishes. Doctors said that she was okay and was in a different place. I strongly disagreed. How in the hell do you know she is not trapped in her body with her brain screaming to have this horror end? They gave me no answer. I was near suicide. My caregiving guru, David, saved me as I attended his support groups, only to find people worse off. Some people had no coverage, no money, no help. I cried every day. Shelley was my love of 50 years, and they would not let her go. Further, David was doing his weekly live videocast program, Caregiver Reality, and had me on to tell my story to the world. The response was overwhelming. So many stories like mine, some better, most worse. I realized this was a national and international problem that many millions face or will face. As the end neared, my daughters came to be at my side. We stayed with my wife, their mother, for 16 hours, leaving at 2 a.m. We had just gotten home when the phone rang. It was hospice saying that Shelley passed at 3:16 on June 6, 2014. They had tortured her for nearly 4 years. Later, I found out that in the entire world, only the Netherlands has changed its rules to allow incompetent people to be represented by surrogates to advocate for their loved ones' right to die. It was then that I realized that we must work every single day to get the US to change its rules and allow people the right to die without any further explanation required beyond their specific instruction in their advance directives and living will. Epilogue. The insurance company paid $720,000 instead of following her wishes to die. If I hadn't had that policy, I might have been bankrupted like so many others. It is inhumane to keep life existing when there is no quality of life. Somewhere in our Judeo-Christian norms, there has to be a place where the right to live is superseded by the right to die. My Cocker Spaniel has greater rights to be euthanized when irretrievably ill, but my wife had to suffer the whole burden of years of suffering simply because the legal system cannot write clear documents that doctors can plainly interpret and act upon, being ensnared in the Hippocratic Oath and medical liability. Thank you for listening.